Hello everyone, my name is Melvin and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about implementation of the ERM or known as the Enterprise Risk Management System across the organization and how we'll be developing the project and incorporating that within our project lifecycle. So the first thing I wanted to kind of address is the problem with the current operation system that we have and why it's not working. I have 4 bullet points that kind of primarily express the inefficiencies with the current system that we have, and I think the most important thing is the lack of cross functionality among regulators, stakeholders, and organizational transparency, and this certainly means that various lines of businesses that we have, HR, finance, um, supply chain, legal, you know, they don't have the database, the systems to be able to go ahead and cross-functionally get the necessary data they need and be able to analyze risk and make inferences to come to conclusions and analyses to understand processes and make improvements on their end, as well as to provide feedback and engage with in other lines of businesses to be able to improve upon their processes as well. So that's the biggest problem that we have with the operation system now is transparency across the whole organization, where the system that we have, it's kind of a runaround where lines of businesses need to go through hoops to be able to get approval and get that necessary information to you know proceed with endeavors that they're working on. The next bullet point I kind of wanted to express is the inability to evaluate major risks through linked processes across lines of businesses, and this kind of is the functionality aspect, as I was mentioning before, as various processes and controls might be linked through cross-functional purposes, meaning legal and HR might have processes that intertwine with each other, and based on circumstances of policies, who's evaluating these risks and who's kind of recognizing um, the concerns with these controls. So I think that this ERM system will allow various lines of businesses to go ahead and understand policies from a governance perspective and be able to apply that um, while analyzing these risks of these processes. Um, the next bullet point I kind of wanted to address is poor integration in the silo approach and I kind of mentioned this before. This comes down to kind of the collaboration aspect. Is we want transparency across the whole organization where departments are collaborating with each other and providing feedback and engagement and kind of understanding each other's processes to kind of fulfill and streamline things to be able to provide a better product as well as to be more operationally efficient um, in terms of transparency. And I guess the last thing that the bullet point I wanted to address is the inability to respond to changes in the market and business demands, and this kind of goes along with changes in technology and innovation, and more so expectations from consumers in terms of the market and how people view things and what's the standard norm in terms of general business activities. So I guess it's a lot to share, right? I think the best way I can kind of express, what's happening with the operation system now and what we're trying to implement is maybe if I bring up a simple paint document and I can kind of visualize to you what the current problems are within the organization. So I'm going to draw some circles here, and we'll actually draw 3 circles, and this will be 3 different lines of businesses that we have. Okay, so we'll say that, how do I want to do this? Actually, I'll just do it like this. Okay, so we'll say that this line of business here is our sales team, and then we have our distribution team. It's not the best D. And then we have our production line. So I guess oops. Oh, come on. These two would be more linked with each other, but that's okay. So what's happening here is that, let's just say we get a request from a client or a consumer named Cairo Hannon, who's expressing that he wants to fulfill a emergency batch order on specification of customized products in a relatively short time frame. And what our sales team, what they have to do is, they look at the request and they say, hey, can we fulfill this? We don't know. So what they'll have to do is they'll have to contact our production line, and our operations production team. They'll have to go ahead and take a look at various metrics and figures, such as the capacity that they have, the consumption rate of machines that are in production with other projects, taking a look at the amount of resources that we have available in terms of commodities such as plastics and metals and parts for our products. And most importantly, the time frame of the project as well, especially with other customers that we're fulfilling, if this is something realistic in terms of scope, to be able to reach that deadline. So what happens is that, as the production team is kind of analyzing and doing their own thing regarding that request, there's a huge delay that occurs for the client, as they're having to wait for the production team to get back to the sales team, and the sales team essentially, needs to kind of make an analysis of the data and the information they've received from the production team to provide an accurate expectation on if this project or this request for the customer is applicable or not. So I guess what I'm trying to say, that there's a lot of delays in terms of cross collaboration, in terms of if projects or if things are be able to complete it in a certain amount of time from a sales perspective, to a production line perspective. So what the enterprise risk management system is capable of doing is, it's essentially going to allow the sales team to kind of bypass going through the proper channels and be able to go look based on approval through management or whatever, go through exactly into the metrics of the production team, and to be able to pull up the necessary data and information, taking a look at capacity, consumption rates, you know price per good, um, the amount of time required, and the various metrics that's necessary needed to go ahead and complete this endeavor. And they can get that information quickly, and essentially be able to get back to our consumers on a very quickly basis, rather than having to wait for a very long time for you know the production team to go ahead and make that analysis. And I think the best part about the enterprise risk management system, it's giving the Salesforce team the necessary data to make adjustments, or negotiate with the consumer as well. So maybe the sales team says, hey, we can't go ahead and complete this whole batch process by next week, but how about if we can do half of them next week, and then maybe the next half a week later. So there is flexibility into the aspect of allowing the sales team to be able to make adjustments accordingly and negotiate with the consumer based on the data that they have. So I think the transparency, as I was mentioning before, is the necessary data is providing flexibility, as well as giving more strategic options to various different departments regarding cross-functionality purposes. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention was from a distribution aspect, the sales team can also go ahead and look at um, tracking and data as well for distribution efforts in terms of how many drivers there are, or the amount of vehicles that are on the road, or geographic locations, to be able to go ahead and see if this request is worth the time, and to be able to directly provide that information to the consumer for large batch processes like this. So as you can see, there's a lot more flexibility and a lot more transparency in terms of lines of business to be able to pull the necessary information that they need and make inferences, and be able to critically think on the fly with that data to make adjustments accordingly based on consumer needs. So I can actually do another example as well, and that was more so from a consumer perspective to meet consumer needs, but I can go ahead and maybe do another example of the usefulness of, actually I'll do it like this. Okay, so another example would be where we have various different lines of businesses. I guess that's a little too many. And let's say we have, this is our production line, this is our legal, this is our sales, this is our marketing, then we have human resources, finance, and so all these different lines of businesses, they're all interconnected with each other one way or another. They don't necessarily have to be interconnected this way, but they have certain processes or procedures that they kind of have to follow, and that's what kind of builds the value chain, right? It's how organization is sort of connected by one process or another. And what I'm trying to approach here is what the enterprise management system will allow is that, let's say if an internal audit team or an external audit team, either or, comes in and they say that, hey, we need to go ahead and we need to go and look at uh, user access for our sales team to see if we have the right people that are employed in the organization for our audit, to make sure that management for our sales team is removing people that are not a part of the organization or that have gone to different departments. And so what the audit team will do is they'll go into the Erm system and they can go ahead and get that information directly from our sales team. And it essentially at the same time, they can go ahead and contact human resources as well, and they can kind of pull the information from human resources and look at the amount of employees that are within the sales team, and then cross reference that with the data logs of people that are accessing the sales software, and make inferences on if there is oversights on issues regarding people not being removed, or if there's validations that need to be made in the system, compared to what it was before within the operation system that we had, where it would almost be like a chain where you would need to contact sales, and then sales would have to go coordinate with human resources, And then, human resources, we need to contact with audit. And then you would have this whole triangular effect of, we need to contact with each other and go through the right means and get the right information. Whereas this is more of a streamlined process, allowing, audit to go ahead and pull up the right information, make inferences, make those educated guesses on the data, and be able to get back to these two very distinctive lines of business quickly, rather having to go through hoops, as I mentioned before, to uh, make the adequate audit decisions when they're looking at the scope of the audit. So I think that was kind of a good general understanding of what the problem of the current system that we have, and kind of what we're trying to implement with the ERM system, and how we're trying to streamline processes where it provides lines of businesses with accurate information, not only data, but more so policies and procedures, and even um, you know uh, governance, compliance, sort of rules as well for each line of business, and that way businesses can various lines of businesses can go and look at those governance policies or procedures, and can see, hey, if something can be done or if it can't be done, rather having to go through legal or other chains to be able to get that information. So implementation of the ERM system and from a stakeholder solution is the implementation enterprise-wide risk management system, which will help various lines of businesses develop core strategies, strong working relationships with stakeholders, shareholders, and executive management, essentially allowing a broad perspective of companies' business and core strategies across functionality of risk associated in areas for full transparency across the company's core business activities. So I guess this kind of is expressing to you, the stakeholder, that we want various lines of businesses to kind of understand what each other is doing, and we want to be able to understand your prospect and your strategies and what you're trying to focus on, specifically, in terms of market demand, and are you focusing on compliance? Are you focusing on operational efficiency? I mean, we're trying to understand the scope of what each line of business is trying to do, and kind of cross-functionalize that, where people can kind of coordinate and understand what each other are doing in these various respective lines, to be able to improve processes and make recommendations as well. So project timeline. This is going to be a lengthy slide here. And I guess the best way I can kind of go through this is if I pull up a spreadsheet here, and then we can go ahead and I can kind of show you what we have here for the phases of our project. So essentially, we're looking at 2.5 years, which is a really long time for this project. It's a very, very in-depth and strenuous process that we have to go through, and I can kind of show you exactly why that is, and how we've come to the conclusion of 2.5 years for this project. So for phase one, we have starting in January of 2018 for our project development plan, where we're kind of going ahead and looking at the project and making sure that it lines up with the organizational directives and mission, and sort of making sure that it lines up with what we're overall trying to accomplish, as well as kind of building the right team, and trying to figure out the necessary people to bring on the project as well, and looking at aspects of capacity planning, and more so looking at budget and time frames, um, to see if there's anything that can be kind of streamlined, and if there is any oversights that might happen or occur on certain um, critical paths. So I think that's the first critical path that we have, and then we have some other aspects that are kind of happening here that aren't necessarily critical, but we'll be primarily focusing on the critical for our stakeholder presentation today. So And the next critical path that we'll be focusing on is the plan approval from a corporate management and stakeholder perspective. So we definitely want to make sure that after we've created our planning memo, that's addressing the budget, time frame, timeline, and more so capacity, that we're able to present that to corporate management and our stakeholders, and get necessary feedback that we need to make changes accordingly to the project, and see if there is any um, concerns, risk, or more so factors that might delay the project, from an internal and, remember, from an external perspective. So we want to get regulatory bodies involved and see if there is going to be any circumstances of this project affecting any regulations, or any circumstances um, that might be affecting federal laws or state laws, or any jurisdictions that might need to have certain processes streamlined in a certain way for regulatory reporting purposes. And so that should be about 4 months there for our plan approval and corporate management and stakeholder approval. Um, I think our first one, I didn't really mention, our development plan should be 4 months as well. So I think the next aspect of our critical path is actually two different paths at the same time. I can kind of explain that in a second, but that should be about 9 months, I believe. Yeah, that's 9 months. So for communication with our lines of businesses, meaning that we're gonna have our various consultants and project team go out to every single line of business, and essentially during that time we'll be going ahead and communicating with various leaders and subject matter experts to be able to understand what they're doing, what their processes are, what the controls are, what's the risk associated with these various processes, how are they following regulatory guidelines, what are the considerations that they have for changes and implementation, and getting general sort of consensus about how they feel about the project, and kind of the input that they can provide us, so that way we can obtain that information and kind of be able to develop drafts, and more so implement a project plan that's kind of surrounding that line of business, as we're incorporating a lot of their activities and ancillary tasks into the ERM system in the near future. So during that time, I think the development of policies of the ERM based on the line of business requirements, and that essentially means that we're taking the various considerations that these lines of businesses are presenting, and then we're going to be developing policies surrounding it, meaning that we'll be looking at previous policies of the lines of businesses, and looking at if there is any inefficiencies or outdated policies, and more so updating them as they kind of transition into the new ERM system, as well as develop any new ones while we are essentially evaluating their processes. Well, actually, we're not evaluating processes yet, but essentially while we're obtaining their feedback and kind of learning about the businesses. So I guess the next critical path we have is 8 months here. One, two, three. Yep, 8 months. So during this time for these two critical paths that we have, we want to make sure that our developers are able to transition the information that we have when we communicated with our lines of business, and also those policies that we're implementing, and then we're kind of adding all of that information into the database that we have, the ERM system. That way it's kind of we're kind of updating the information, and we're kind of streamlining the system, as well as our developers are able to kind of look at any problems with the system, and getting necessary feedbacks in terms of how they can make changes, and what they can kind of do to make that process more streamlined feedback that we received from the line of businesses. In addition to that, development of controls and processes for the line of business of within the implementation of ERM, and then I kind of got to head earlier with processes, but I think I wanted to mention earlier that this is kind of the portion of when our subject matter experts would be looking at processes and controls in the line of business and kind of identifying if there's any inefficiencies or improvements and changes that we can make in procedures and policies to be able to meet the new expectations of the ERM system, as well as kind of look at general demographics for product lines and more so see if there is necessary changes that we need to make based on those circumstances. So I guess the next critical path that we have is final test plan and recommendations from subject matter experts and lines of businesses. And I guess after we've come to more than like 80% of our completion of the transition of all of the necessary information into the RM systems, and we've kind of developed the processes and controls, we've kind of wanted to create a test phase and plan. We'll be releasing a test plan for various lines of businesses, and that way they can kind of go ahead and have necessary subject matter experts do regression testing to make any changes and recognize oversights and make necessary adjustments for anything missed or any processes changed during that time frame of those 8 months, if something has changed or things have been updated, or any recommendations that they feel like that needs to be done. We'll be going ahead and having a few more months to go ahead and have a final test phase for our lines of business to be able to kind of see if this system is working for them. In addition to that, we'll be kind of slowly rolling out and the implementation of the system across the organization. So we'll be slowly rolling out and updates and kind of getting people more familiarized from our stakeholder perspective, how the system works and how we're kind of rolling it out in terms of just periodic updates and providing training documents and helping people get more familiarized with this application and how it kind of works in a daily basis for every line of business. And then the final aspect is a final review and approval, which is, I believe, only 1 month, and that kind of is where our board of directors and corporate governance is going to look at the the um the ERM system, and then they can make any recommendations or changes that they feel that's kind of been an oversight, as well as regulatory bodies and other external stakeholders can also kind of look at the system as well and see if this is going to be something that's going to be useful for the organization, as well as from an industry standard perspective. So we've talked a lot regarding the project timeline. I think the next thing we kind of wanted to talk about is the communication plan with our stakeholders, and we have two distinctive plans. The informal communication plan with our stakeholder is a management matrix that will adequately measure stakeholder support, resistance, and conflict with the decisions on the project. The purpose of the matrix is of the engagement matrix is to distinguish stakeholders independently based on desired levels of engagement, expressing informal communication. And I guess to kind of um, clarify that and make it a little bit more easier to understand, it's pretty much that we're getting people that have interest in a certain aspect of the project, and we're kind of putting them in certain categories. That way, if someone is interested in procurement and they have questions about procurement, a subject matter expert can go ahead and contact that person directly, or that subject matter expert can, have that person join a email group where they can periodically get emails about procurement. That way, that stakeholder has a point of contact with a subject matter expert, as well as they're getting periodic updates about procurement and the development stages of procurement, or whatever they want to know regarding the project. Our formal communication plan is a quarterly stakeholder meetings that will kind of adhere to various topics and concerns and deliberations on their project. That essentially means, stakeholders can bring up their concerns about the project, and it will give a whole organizational overview about from project leaders and subject matter experts on what's kind of happening on the project, and areas of focus and aspects of limitations and considerations that's happening for the project as well during that time. And the last topic we wanted to talk about is, we want to make sure that we're using the right metrics. So specific KPI metrics will be used to identify project implementation for key performances. These indicators will generally address, where we're at on the project in terms of budget, time constraints, as well as the scope of the project. And our project managers can use these metrics to identify, you know, completion of time, budget, resources, as I mentioned before. But more importantly, we want to be able to provide um, our primary interest group and stakeholders that are involved um, directly with the project. We want to give them expectations. So I think this is the best way to go ahead and provide these metrics as we're going through the project as well, to be able to directly give feedback on a quantitative perspective as we're going through the processes of the project life cycle. So I think that was a lot of information that we went through today. I thank you very much for everyone's time and listening to the implementation of the ERM system. If there's any questions or concern, you can please feel free to get back to us at the ERM team implementation team. That way we can further see uh, how the project goes based on your recommendations and feedback from this PowerPoint. So thank you very much for your time.